Before we begin our time together this morning, I want to be honest and clear with you, as friends should be. In creating this space for us to reflect and pray, I have used modern AI tools to help craft these words, clear the images, and lend a steady voice to my thoughts. My intention isn't to present a cold, clinical truth, but to share a very personal, very human experience of faith. These are my reflections, a map of my own heart's journey, and they may not mirror yours exactly. If your path looks different, I welcome your thoughts and your stories in the comments below. Let's walk this road with grace for one another. Have you ever noticed how the world feels entirely different at 4 o'clock in the morning? It's a blue-gray world, draped in a silence so thick you can almost hear your own heartbeat. For years, I hated this hour. I saw it as a symptom of getting older, the insomnia of the elderly, the doctors might call it. I would lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes until the sun would justify me getting out of bed. The darkness felt heavy, like a room filled with all the worries I had managed to ignore during the busy daylight hours. But then, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden bolt of lightning, but a slow, quiet realization. I started to feel that this waking wasn't an accident of biology, but a gentle tap on the shoulder. It felt as if heaven was leaning in, whispering, "The world is finally quiet enough for us to talk." I remember the first morning I decided to stop fighting the wakefulness. I climbed out of bed, the floorboards groaning softly under my weight, a familiar sound that usually annoyed me, but that morning it sounded like an invitation. I went to the kitchen, not to pace or fret, but to simply sit. I didn't turn on the big overhead lights. I just let the small glow from the stove clock guide me. In those early moments, I realized that between 3 and 5 a.m., the noise of the world is at its lowest. The emails aren't coming in, the sirens are fewer, and the expectations of who I am supposed to be in society have gone to sleep. It is just me and the great I am. I don't claim that this hour is magic, or that God only listens when it's dark. But I found that I was more capable of listening when the world stopped shouting. It's a sacred vigil. It's a choice to stand as a sentinel while everyone else rests. If you've found yourself awake at this hour, don't see it as a burden. See it as an appointment, one made specifically for you. To understand why this hour matters, I have to tell you about my neighbor, Mr. Henderson. He's lived 3 houses down from me for 20 years. He's a veteran, a man of few words and a very stiff back, the kind of person who keeps his lawn trimmed like a military barracks. For a long time, I only saw him during the day, usually behind a lawnmower or checking his mail with a brisk nod. But one morning, back when I was still new to this pre-dawn rhythm, I stepped out onto my porch at 4:15 a.m. to catch a breath of the crisp night air. There, across the street, I saw a small, orange glow, the cherry of a cigarette. It was Mr. Henderson, sitting on his porch steps in the dark, perfectly still. A few days later, we happened to meet at the edge of our driveways. I mentioned, a bit sheepishly, that I'd seen him up early. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to have seen too much and said, "The ghosts are louder at night, son. Sometimes you have to sit out here just to make sure the world is still standing." I realized then that Mr. Henderson wasn't just up early. He was carrying the weight of old memories, battles fought decades ago, friends lost, and the quiet regrets that only visit a man when the sun is down. It struck me that so many of us we wake up not because we want to, but because our spirits are unsettled. That morning, after our talk, I went back inside and sat in the chair. Instead of just praying for my forgiveness, I realized that my feeling of wake-up was an opportunity to step into the those who are because they are ultimately waiting. I can find my grace has passed. I simply asked for the grace of peace and sit in that porch. I learned that we don't pray at 3 a.m. to escape reality, but to invite still be heavy, but I've noticed a softness in his nod lately. It reminded me that our prayers at this hour are like a silent patrol, covering those who are too weary to pray for themselves. Whenever I sit in the stillness of 3:30 a.m., my mind often drifts back to a time when these hours were filled with a different kind of exhaustion. I think of my daughter Elena. I remember the nights when she was just a few months old, and I would pace the hallway with her tucked against my shoulder. Back then, the 3 a.m. hour felt like a test of endurance, a blur of soft lullabies, and the desperate hope that she would finally close her eyes so I could close mine. But as the years passed, the nature of those vigils changed. Now, Elena is a grown woman with a mortgage, a high-stress career, and eyes that look far more tired than mine did at her age. She calls me sometimes in the evening, her voice thin and frayed, telling me about the pressures of her world, the deadlines, the uncertainties, the feeling that she's constantly running and never catching up. One recent morning, the clock hit 3:45 a.m. and her face flashed clearly in my mind. I could almost feel her anxiety radiating through the darkness of my quiet house. In my younger years, I would have spent that hour worrying, replaying her problems, wondering what advice I could give to fix her life, or feeling guilty that I couldn't protect her from the world's harshness. But that morning, sitting in my old rocking chair, the same one I used when she was a baby, I realized that I was being called to a different kind of mothering. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Lord, she is beyond my reach right now, but she is never beyond yours." I've learned that the pre-dawn hours are for the holy handoff. It's the time when we stop trying to be the savior for our children and let the true savior take over. I spent that hour not asking for her to have an easy life, but for her to have a resilient spirit. I didn't ask for her problems to vanish, but for her to notice the small mercies God places in her path. When the sun finally began to peek through the blinds, I felt a strange lightness. My daughter's situation hadn't changed, but I had. I had moved from being a worried spectator to a spiritual advocate. Later that day, she sent me a short text. "Woke up feeling a bit more peaceful today. Not sure why, but I'll take it." I didn't tell her about my 3 a.m. appointment. I just smiled, knowing that while she was sleeping, a battle had been fought on her behalf in the quietest room of my house. Whenever I find my mind racing during these early hours, I find myself thinking of Brother Thomas. He was a pillar of our community, a man who had spent 40 years working in a steel mill and another 30 serving as a church elder. His hands were thick and calloused, permanently stained with the dust of honest labor. Yet when he held his Bible, he handled it as if it were made of spun glass. I remember visiting him once when he was well into his 80s. He told me, "Child, the night is when the enemy likes to whisper lies, because he knows your body is tired and your defenses are down. You can't fight a spirit with a weary mind. You have to fight it with the word." He showed me his Bible. The pages were so thin they were translucent, covered in handwritten notes and coffee stains from decades of morning vigils. Now, when I sit in the dark and the what-ifs start to howl like the wind outside, I reach for that same shield. I don't just read the words, I let them inhabit the room. There is something profoundly grounding about reciting Psalm 91 while the world is still in shadows. "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." In the pre-dawn silence, those aren't just poetic verses, they are a tactical defense. I think of Brother Thomas and how he never seemed rattled by the news or the changing times. He knew that the truth doesn't change just because the sun hasn't come up yet. I've learned not to rely on my own feelings at 4 a.m. Feelings are fickle in the dark. They can make a small problem look like a giant. But the word is a steady lamp. I've made it a habit to keep my Bible open on the side table. I don't need a study guide or a complicated plan. I just need to remind my soul who is in charge. By the time I finish a few verses, the room feels different. The shadows haven't moved, but the fear has lost its grip. Brother Thomas was right. The Word isn't just a book you read. It's a fortress you step into when the night gets long. There's a specific kind of cold that settles into a house around 3:45 a.m. And sometimes it isn't just the weather, it's the chilling weight of unpaid bills and a shrinking bank account. I remember a man I worked with years ago named David. He was a proud man, a business owner who always wore a crisp shirt and a confident smile. But during the Great Recession, I watched that confidence crumble. I bumped into him at a local coffee shop once, long after we had both retired. He looked older, but there was a strange, quiet strength in his eyes. He told me that at the height of his financial collapse, he would wake up every night at 3 a.m. with his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd sit at his kitchen table with his ledger, his calculator, and a growing sense of panic. I was trying to math my way out of a miracle, he told me with a soft laugh. One night, David decided to push the ledger aside. He realized that staring at the red numbers was only feeding his fear, not solving his problem. He started using those 2 hours not to calculate, but to surrender. He told me, I stopped asking God for a specific check and started asking him for a specific peace. David didn't wake up the next day to find his debts gone, but he woke up with a clear mind. He found the wisdom to sell what he didn't need, the humility to ask for help, and the grace to realize that his value wasn't tied to his net worth. When I find myself worrying about my own fixed income or an unexpected repair bill at 4 a.m., I think of David's kitchen table. I've learned that anxiety is just a misuse of the imagination. In the stillness, I tell the Lord, I don't see the way out, but I know the way maker. My 3 a.m. prayer isn't a demand for a windfall. It's a declaration of trust in the midday provider. It's amazing how much smaller a mountain looks when you stop measuring it and start talking to the one who created the mountains in the first place. As I sit here, my phone sits on the end table, its screen dark. But inside it are photos of my granddaughter, Sarah. She's at that age now where the world is pulling at her from every direction. Social media, school, a culture that seems to move faster than any of us can keep up with. Sometimes, when I look at the world she's inheriting, I feel a pang of genuine fear. It feels like she's walking through a storm without an umbrella. A few nights ago, I couldn't sleep, and I found myself looking at a video she'd sent of her just laughing with friends. At 4:10 a.m., while she was hundreds of miles away in her college dorm, I felt a sudden, urgent need to pray for her. I thought of the wall of fire mentioned in the scriptures, a spiritual hedge that the world cannot penetrate. I've learned that my prayers at this hour are like building a fortress around her while she sleeps. I don't pray that she'll be perfect. I pray that she'll be protected. I ask that God would give her a holy no when she needs it and a divine yes when opportunity knocks. I pray for the friends she hasn't met yet and the decisions she'll face tomorrow. There's a comfort in knowing that while Sarah is navigating the noise of her generation, her grandfather is in the quiet, calling down the protection of heaven. I picture those walls of fire surrounding her dorm, her car, and her heart. It's not about being a helicopter grandparent through the phone. It's about being a spiritual guardian through the spirit. When I finally see the sky start to turn from black to deep purple, I feel a sense of relief. I might not be able to walk beside her every day, but I can certainly stand guard for her every night. There is a specific kind of silence that exists in a hospital wing or a nursing home in the deep of the night. It's a heavy silence, often broken only by the hum of machines or the soft squeak of a nurse's rubber soles. I think of my friend Mrs. Gable. We used to sit in the same pew at church for years, until her hips gave out and she moved into the assisted living center across town. When I visit her, she doesn't complain about her wheelchair or the many pills she has to take. Instead, she tells me about her early morning travels. Because she sleeps lightly, she is often wide awake by 3:30 a.m. She told me once, my legs don't move like they used to, but in the spirit, I run miles every morning. She spends those hours visiting each of her children, her neighbors, and even the staff at the center through prayer. Watching her, I realize that physical limitations can often lead to spiritual liberation. When your body is still, your spirit has no choice but to soar. Many of us waking up at this hour are dealing with the aches of age or the recovery from an illness. It is so easy to let that pain become the center of our attention. But Mrs. Gable taught me that the pre-dawn hour is a time for internal healing. I've learned that when I pray between 3 and 5 a.m., I am asking for more than just the absence of pain. I am asking for the presence of peace. I've sat in my chair with a throbbing knee and realized that while the knee still hurts, my soul feels completely whole. We don't pray to convince God to change our circumstances, as much as we pray to let God change us within them. Mrs. Gable's room always smells faintly of lavender and old books, but when you're there at 4 a.m., it feels like a cathedral. It reminded me that healing isn't always about walking again. Sometimes it's about finally learning how to rest. A few weeks ago, I was at the local grocery store, rushing to get my shopping done before the evening crowd arrived. I found myself behind a woman at the checkout who looked utterly spent. She had a toddler tugging at her sleeve and a look in her eyes that I can only describe as a quiet drowning. She fumbled with her coupons, her hands shaking slightly, and for a moment, I felt that typical human prick of impatience because I had things to do. But then, I saw her face clearly. She wasn't just tired, she was at the end of her rope. I didn't say anything, it wasn't the time or place for a sermon, but I carried the image of her tired eyes home with me. That night, I woke up at exactly 3:12 a.m. The house was cold, and my initial thought was to pull the blankets higher and try to drift back to sleep. But then, her face came back to me. I realized then that the 3 a.m. call isn't always about my life or my family. Sometimes it's a repositioning. It's God pulling us out of our own little bubbles to care about a stranger we'll never see again. I sat up, wrapped a quilt around my shoulders, and I prayed for that woman. I didn't know her name, her story, or what was breaking her heart, but I knew the one who did. I've learned that intercession is the most selfless form of love. When you pray for a stranger in the middle of the night, there is no thank you, no recognition, and no personal gain. It's just you and God tending to a wound in the world's side. I spent that hour asking that she would find a random moment of kindness the next day, or that she would feel a sudden, unexplainable sense of being loved while she washed the dishes. By the time I went back to bed, I realized my own petty frustrations from the day had vanished. My 3 a.m. prayer had repositioned my heart from selfishness to service. We aren't just waking up to seek help. Sometimes we wake up to be the help, invisible and steady, in the spiritual realm. In the heart of my neighborhood lives a woman many simply call Sister Margaret. She spent 30 years as a missionary in some of the most crowded, noisy, and chaotic corners of the world. Now retired, she lives in a small cottage filled with plants and a profound, ringing silence. I asked her once if she ever felt lonely in such a quiet house. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and said, "Silence isn't an empty room, dear. It's a room full of God that you finally stopped cluttering with your own voice." That conversation changed how I view the hours between 4 and 5 a.m. For a long time, I thought I had to fill that time with words. I thought a powerful prayer meant a long list of requests, well-chosen verses, and a lot of talking. But Sister Margaret taught me the art of the holy pause. She taught me that sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do at 3:30 in the morning is to just be. I've started practicing this. I sit in my chair, the heater humming quietly in the corner, and I don't say a word. I don't ask for anything. I just offer my presence. It's like sitting on a porch with an old friend, where you don't need to talk because the friendship is so deep that the silence is comfortable. In those moments, I find that my spirit begins to reset. The jagged edges of my temper, the static of my worries, and the clutter of my opinions all start to settle like dust in a still room. I've learned that the silence of the pre-dawn hours is a language all its own. It's the language of intimacy. When I finally do speak, my words are fewer, but they carry more weight. I realize that I don't have to convince God of anything. I just have to align myself with Him. If you find yourself awake and your mind feels like a blank page, don't rush to write on it. Let the silence do its work. As Sister Margaret says, you can't hear a whisper if you're the one doing all the shouting. As I sit here now, the ink-black sky outside my window has begun to soften into a bruised purple, then a pale, hopeful amber. The birds are just starting their first tentative notes, the dawn chorus, as some call it. My coffee has grown cold in the mug, but my heart feels warmer than it has in days. This journey we've taken together through the night, from the heavy memories of Mr. Henderson to the silent strength of Sister Margaret, reminds me that the hours between 3 and 5 a.m. are not a desert to be feared, but an oasis to be cherished. I don't know what woke you up today. Maybe it was an ache in your body, a worry in your mind, or perhaps it was just that gentle, divine tap on the shoulder. But I do know this: you didn't wake up alone. I've learned that consistency is the soil in which faith grows. That's why I want to invite you to join me in this vigil for the next 7 days. There is something significant about the number 7 in our faith. It represents a complete cycle, a fullness. Don't worry about having the right words or being a prayer warrior. Just show up, sit in the quiet, hand over the ledgers of your debt and the photos of your grandchildren to the one who holds tomorrow. As the sun finally breaks over the horizon, I find myself thinking of Lamentations. His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I'm going to step into this day now, and I suspect you are too. The challenges haven't all vanished, and the world hasn't stopped spinning, but I am moving forward with a different spirit. I am no longer just a person getting older in a fast world. I am a sentinel of the dawn. Thank you for sitting with me in the dark. If this time has touched you, I'd love to hear about it. Your stories are the fuel that keeps this community going. Until we meet again in the quiet hours, remember that the light is coming, and it always starts in the heart of the one who prays.